Hi, Brianna.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Good to see you again.
Thanks for agreeing to meet with me. So today we're going to talk about your lesson that I observed on June 8th. It was third period, so that was about 10:30 in the morning. It was a second grade class. I know it was mixed abilities. There were 3 ESL students, 6 IEP students, and 1 student with a paraprofessional who is on the autistic spectrum. Is that correct? Okay. So let me start by thanking you for inviting me into your classroom again, and also to talk to you a little bit about today we're going to look at how, like we talked about in the the pre-observation, assessment tool to kind of get a sense of how students are learning. So you and I decided that we were going to work on the strategies for diverse learners. And so that's what we're going to kind of focus on today. We're going to talk a little bit about your objectives and how the class flowed and what you thought about all of those things.
Okay.
All right. So let me ask you first, based on what we discussed in the pre-observation, how do you feel that the lesson went overall?
Well, the lesson was, so my lesson, you saw like day 2 over the course of like a 4-day project, but specifically, you caught an interesting one because I had about 5 students who were not present for day 1 of the lesson, and so in my art class, everything kind of builds like one step on top of the next. So they had been absent because of ESL testing, actually. So I had to play a little bit of catch up, but I didn't want the rest of the class to kind of be at a standstill. So how I chose to approach it was I taught the whole class and I demonstrated the next step of the project, which you observed creating hot air balloons, but the main goal was to create a repeat color pattern using paint. So the 2 things I was looking for were that the students can create either an A-B pattern, A-B, like red, blue pattern using paint, or for some of my higher level students, if they wanted to create like an ABC, adding a 3rd color but keeping it a consistent pattern. So the second thing I was looking for was the painting side of it, because I'm always constantly making sure that they're using the material properly, holding the brush properly, cleaning out their, so there's like the skill side, and then there's like the physical skill, the fine motor skill, I should say, and also the concept. So that was what my goal was, but my students had already drawn out their design of the hot air balloon in the first lesson. So the students who had not been there in the first lesson didn't have that format to base off of. So I had to then backtrack, and I did a reteach basically in small group of the students who had missed out after I taught the whole color pattern lesson.
Yeah.
It was an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, it was
a lot going on.
There was a lot. Classroom. It was a very dynamic classroom. Can I ask if you felt like you met the objectives for the lessons for all the students?
I would say the objectives were met for all but maybe 2 students that I feel didn't fully meet the objective. And I'll go back the next time and kind of make modifications or do a one-on-one to get them to where they need to be.
Were these 2 students who had missed the day prior?
Yeah, one of the students was, he was very eager. He loves to paint. So he saw that all the other students were already on to the painting portion of the lesson, but I had to kind of reel him in and bring him back. Say, no, we have to trace out our the hot air balloon stencil and draw out the design on there. So he was very impatiently not knowing what, but I want to paint, and he was being difficult.
Yeah, as students sometimes do. So what would you have done differently to make sure that this particular student effectively met the objective for the lesson?
Well, I think, to be honest with you, it's difficult to keep tabs on like how many, or I didn't quite realize, or I didn't quite remember that those students had missed the first lesson, or that they were all not present at that time. You know, students get pulled out of my classroom for various reasons frequently. I think what I could have done was kind of given him and the rest of that group like anticipatory, like, okay, you didn't do this part. I didn't really give them the headway like in the beginning, because I realized that they didn't do that step of it when we pulled out the artwork, when it was like, okay, and they're like, but we don't have one. So for me, it would have been better planning on that end. And sometimes there's a lot going on. I have lots of different groups coming in throughout the day, so I think I could have better prepared myself and remembering like, oh, I missed that first part.
I know your classroom is much different than the language arts classrooms or math classrooms in that you are a special, and so you literally have a revolving door, so there's not a whole lot of downtime. Perhaps you could work on a method to record the names of the students and just check it over, so that you could have like, you know, or what would you do in that particular circumstance?
Probably just that, like jot down and put it on their box how I have this stuff organized. And it was just like a complete like lapse of my realizing that such a large group. Usually you have one student absent or two students, but to have that many students not present, I should have remembered.
And on the first day, that's a tough one.
Yeah, on the first day of starting the new lesson, because they really were at a disadvantage.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Thanks for kind of giving me a synopsis of how you felt the objectives were met and how the class went. So the next few questions are going to be based on the tool for diverse learners to kind of see where you felt, I know I was kind of using this as a checklist for myself, where you felt you were effective or not effective and what you could do better. So the first question I have for you is, how do you feel like your proximity to the students in the class during the lesson helped or was effective in facilitating instruction, or was ineffective?
I think one of my strengths as a teacher, and this is what I think, is that I do move around the room, and I try and get to each table, and if not each individual, at some point during their independent work time, checking in to make sure that they are on task, that they are understanding. The one thing I've consciously done this year is I've tried to consistently have my demonstrations in the same kind of setup information, so that the students can anticipate how we're gonna stand, how we'll gather around, because that's one of the big challenges is when you have a group of, you know, second graders, making sure everybody can see who's bumping into this one, to do that without wasting time. So I really have tried to make sure that
We're good, thanks.
to make sure that everything is kind of routine. I think in the past I would change up, like, well, I'll demonstrate up at the board, or I'll demonstrate at a table, or I'll demonstrate at this table. This school year I've really tried to kind of keep it in one consistent place, so that their anticipation of how to behave is one way. But then for me, while there were, like, I don't sit at my, you sat at my desk, so I never sit at a desk. I'll sit with the students and demonstrate, or sit next to, and then circle around the room throughout the period.
Yeah, I think I want to ask you how you feel like going to each table really allows you to get a sense of where the students are.
Well,
or
I'm
not.
So I try and leave at least one seat open so that I can actually join them beyond their level. And particularly with art, I can just observe how they're doing. I can also provide feedback. Sometimes I'll do like a hand over hand if they're not holding a brush a certain way. If need be, I can demonstrate again one-on-one or question them. I always keep examples and things up at the board, so we can refer back to that if they need that. So
that brings me to my next question. What particular ways did you think that the reinforcement techniques worked, or were effective or ineffective? Like, you do a lot of reinforcements, like you just mentioned, like you have examples, or you go and do hand over hand. So what do you think are the most effective, and what do you think in this particular lesson were not so effective?
Well, with one student in particular, one of the strategies I demonstrated to the whole class was in an A-B pattern, kind of just taking a dot of red paint or a dot of your one color and saying, okay, red here, skip space, red here, skip space, and then putting the dot in there and then painting the whole shape in. And then going through with your second color, say it's blue, so then you fill in that. It limits how many times the student has to wash their brush out, and it will make a much cleaner, nicer, the end result will be better. And I had a student that refused to do that. They wanted to paint in the red shape, clean out their brush, do the blue shape, clean out their brush. So
how do you handle something like that to make sure that they are on task and doing the process?
Well, that's when I stopped the student. I had them look at another student and, someone who was successfully accomplishing it, see how so-and-so is doing, and have them kind of take a step back and look around, maybe like look around, take a lap around the room to see how the other students are doing it, and then have them revisit their own work, because sometimes listening to me is not enough. And so hopefully a peer can help them out. For some students, I would actually sit with them and I would get their first row started of the pattern, and then say, hey, okay, you do the next row of the pattern, and watch until they got it.
And what do you do when they get it or don't get it? Like, how do you reinforce the behavior?
Compliment them on, oh, you're getting but not just good job, also complimenting specifically what they're doing. Yeah. So I'm always like, oh, your nice brush work, nice, that pattern looks very, talk about how the color pops.
Sure.
Something to let them know that what they're specifically doing is on the right track.
Yeah, I definitely witnessed that. So in terms of, this is a very diverse classroom. It's a lot of kids, a young group of kids. They're second grade, there's 17 kids, and there are 10 of those kids who all have different modifications and needs. So this is a kind of a multi-step process, as the last lesson I observed also was a multi-step process. How do you feel that your modifications work for individual learners? Like, maybe you want to talk about how you modify for your ESL kids and what's effective and not effective.
For my ESL students, well, you saw in particular, I had them on that day. They were my students who were not there, so I did a small group, and I'll do that for anyone who I think, as I kind of do my walk around and see that maybe somebody's not getting it, or these 3 or 4, so we'll gather at a table in a specific spot, and I can re-demonstrate or slow my pace a little bit. I am fortunate to have an aide in my classroom, and while she is primarily there for my student who's on the autistic spectrum, I have strategically placed 2 of my ESL students who tend to be strugglers. I don't think their language barrier is the problem. I think that they have other things going on there too. So she often helps to a level that I almost am not aware of. Like, she's excellent. and she will kind of keep them on track